In the sun-baked heart of Texas, where hope often withers like summer grass, Levi Boone has nothing but his faithful horse, Dusty, and a reputation for being the kind of man who'd give you his last dollar. That reputation is about to be tested. When he discovers a pregnant widow stranded on the outskirts of town one sweltering evening, Levi doesn't hesitate. He gives her his only possession of value. Dusty, knowing full well it means a long, grueling walk home under the merciless Texas sun. But by dawn's first light, that simple act of kindness will change his life forever. Because Rosalie Quinn isn't just any widow, she's the heir to the largest cattle empire in the county. And in Levi's selfless gesture, she sees something no amount of money can buy. What secret from Rosalie's past drove her to flee in the first place? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Texas sky in watercolor hues as Levi Boone scratched another meager payment into his worn ledger. $8 for mending the Henderson's fence. $12 for helping old Jim Tucker with his hay baling. The pages told a story of honest work and humble earnings, each entry carefully recorded in his grandfather's steady hand until arthritis claimed those working fingers, and then in Levi's own careful script. Dusty's soft nickering drew his attention from the cramped numbers. The horse stood patient in the morning light, his coat the color of sun-bleached coffee grounds, watching Levi with those knowing eyes that had seen him through 7 years of lean times and long days. Some folks couldn't understand how a man could pour his heart into an animal the way Levi did with Dusty. But they hadn't been there the night Levi's truck finally gave up the ghost, leaving him 20 miles from home in a November storm. Dusty had gotten him back, fighting through wind and sleet without a single misstep. Ready for another day's work, old friend? Levi ran a weathered hand along Dusty's neck, feeling the strong muscles beneath. The horse butted his chest gently, a morning ritual as familiar as the sunrise. Their partnership was written in a language of small gestures, a shifted weight, a tilted ear, the subtle ways Dusty would adjust his stride when Levi's old rodeo injury acted up. The morning air carried the promise of another scorcher, but that was nothing new in this part of Texas. Levi had learned long ago that complaining about the heat was like arguing with the wind, a waste of breath that could be better spent getting work done. He checked his schedule, penciled in his own hand on the back of an envelope. Fence repair at the Wilson place, then help Doc Jenkins with his sick cattle, and if there was still daylight, maybe he'd get to that broken irrigation pipe at the Peterson farm. It wasn't the life most people dreamed of, scraping by on odd jobs and the goodwill of neighbors who remembered his grandfather's reputation for honest work. But Levi had never wanted for more than what he could earn with his own 2 hands and Dusty's willing spirit. The ranch hands at bigger operations might joke about him being the last of a dying breed, a cowboy without a proper ranch to his name. But there was dignity in independence, even if it came with an empty wallet. Loading his tools into the saddlebags, Levi thought about the offers he'd turned down over the years. The foreman's position at the Big Creek Ranch, with its steady paycheck and employee housing. The chance to partner on a small cattle operation with Tucker's son-in-law. But those opportunities came with strings attached. And if there was one, the thing Levi valued above all else, it was the freedom to look any man in the eye and know he owed nothing more than his word and his work. Dusty stood perfectly still as Levi tightened the cinch, another small kindness in their years together. The saddle was well worn but meticulously maintained, every piece of leather cleaned and conditioned weekly. It had been his father's before him, and sometimes Levi thought he could still catch the ghost of his old man's tobacco scent in the leather on warm days. The sun was climbing higher as they set out, Dusty's hooves raising small clouds of dust from the drought-hardened earth. The Wilson place was a good hour's ride, but Levi never minded. These morning rides were when he did his best thinking, when the world was still quiet enough to hear the wisdom his grandfather had tried to instill in him. that a man's character was built in the moments when no one was watching, and that true. Wealth wasn't counted in dollars, but in the respect you earned and the help you gave without expecting anything in return. As they rode, Levi spotted a young hawk riding the thermals overhead, and he smiled at the memory of his grandfather's words. "You see that bird, boy? Free as anything you've ever seen. But even he's got to work for his dinner. That's the secret to living right. Find the work that makes you feel free." For Levi Boone, that freedom was found in the simple partnership between a man and his horse, in the satisfaction of work well done, and in the knowledge that at day's end he'd earned every bit of rest he got. It wasn't a rich man's life by any measure, but it was honest, and sometimes that was worth more than gold. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when Levi first spotted the vehicle, a dark silhouette against the burning sky. He'd taken the long way home from the Peterson place, cutting across the old Carson trail that few folks used anymore. Something about the car's angle seemed wrong. Not parked so much as lurched to one side, like a wounded animal. Dusty's ears pricked forward, picking up on something Levi couldn't yet hear. As they drew closer, the details emerged. A late-model SUV, expensive but dust-covered, with its hood up like a surrender flag. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the evening chorus of cicadas and wind through mesquite, crying. Found her sitting on a flat rock beside the vehicle, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly, the other wiping futilely at tears that had left tracks in the dust on her cheeks. She startled at Dusty's approach, and Levi saw something flash across her face. Fear, quickly masked by a forced composure that spoke of practice. "Evening, ma'am," Levi said, keeping his voice gentle, the way he might approach a spooked horse. "Looks like you could use some help." He remained mounted, giving her space, letting her take his measure. She was city-polished but trail-worn, her clothes expensive but rumpled from hours of travel. Dark hair escaped from what had probably started the day as an elegant twist, and, despite her obvious distress, she held herself with a dignity that reminded Levi of the Queen's in his mother's old playing cards. "The engine just died," she said, her voice hoarse from crying but struggling for steadiness. "I've been trying to get a signal, but out here," she gestured helplessly at her phone. Levi nodded. "Reception's spotty in these parts. Nearest tower's behind the mesa." He glanced at the sun, measuring the remaining daylight. "Town's about 15 miles back. Doc Jenkins has a tow truck, but he won't be able to come out till morning." The woman's hand tightened over her belly, and Levi noticed how she winced slightly as she shifted position. "I can't. I need to reach Millbrook by morning. It's important." There was something in her voice, not just worry, but a deeper current of desperation. "Millbrook?" Levi frowned. "That's another 30 miles east." He studied her face more carefully now, noting the shadows under her eyes, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder at the empty road behind them. She was running from something, or someone. "I have an appointment," she said, but the words rang hollow like a rehearsed line she'd stopped believing in. "A doctor's appointment." Dusty shifted beneath him, and Levi absently patted the horse's neck, buying time to think. The smart play would be to ride to the nearest ranch with a phone, call Doc Jenkins to come first thing in the morning. But something in him knew that morning would be too late for whatever was driving this woman to push on despite her condition. "I'm Levi Boone," he said finally, "and this here's Dusty." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Rosalie," she offered after a moment's hesitation. Just Rosalie, no last name, and Levi didn't press. The wind picked up, carrying with it the first hints of nighttime's chill. Rosalie shivered, and Levi made his decision. "Dusty, here's the surest-footed horse in 3 counties. He can get you to Millbrook before dawn." He swung down from the saddle, his boots raising small puffs of dust. "I couldn't possibly," she began, but Levi was already adjusting the stirrups. "Ma'am, Rosalie, whatever's waiting in Millbrook must be mighty important for you to be out here alone in your condition." He kept his voice neutral, careful not to push. "Dusty will see you safe. He knows the way better than any GPS." She studied him with eyes that had seen too much trust betrayed to give it easily now. "Why would you do this? You don't know me." Levi thought about his grandfather's words about character and helping without expecting return. "Because sometimes folks need help and sometimes folks can give it. Seems to me that's all there is to know." The last light was fading from the sky when Rosalie finally nodded, accepting his hand as she rose unsteadily from the rock. In the gathering darkness, Levi showed her how to guide Dusty with the lightest touch, how to lean forward slightly on the upslopes, and most importantly, how to trust the horse's instincts on the trail. As he watched them disappear into the dusk, Dusty's sure strides carrying his precious cargo eastward, Levi offered up a quiet prayer to whatever angels watched over fools and good horses. Then he turned west toward the long walk home, knowing that sometimes the right choice and the hard choice were the same thing. Before mounting Dusty, Rosalie pressed a folded piece of paper into Levi's hand. Her fingers were trembling, but her writing was steady, elegant loops forming a promise. "I'll bring him back by dawn. You have my word." She'd torn the page from a leather-bound journal, the kind sold in boutique stores where Levi had never set foot. The paper felt foreign against his calloused palm, like money from another country. "Ma'am, that's not necessary," he started to say, but she cut him off with a shake of her head. "Please, let me have this much dignity." Her voice caught slightly. "Your trust deserves something in return, even if it's just words on paper." Levi tucked the note into his shirt pocket, more for her peace of mind than his own. He took his time, checking the cinch one last time, adjusting the stirrups to accommodate her condition. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his heart was performing a complicated dance of certainty and doubt. Dusty watched him with those knowing eyes, and Levi found himself having one of their silent conversations. "Take care of her, old friend," he murmured, pressing his forehead briefly against Dusty's warm neck. The horse's tail swished once as if to say, "Don't I always?" Helping Rosalie mount was a delicate operation. She was clearly unused to horses, but necessity made her brave. When she settled into the saddle, Dusty adjusted his stance automatically, compensating for her unfamiliar weight and balance. Pride swelled in Levi's chest. His horse had always been good, but moments like these showed his true worth. "Keep your hands light on the reins," he instructed, going over the essentials one more time. "Dusty knows what he's doing. If you get lost, just give him his head. He can find Millbrook blindfolded." He patted the saddlebag where he'd stowed a bottle of water and what remained of his lunch. "There's some jerky in there if you get hungry. The trail follows the creek most of the way. You'll hear it on your right." Rosalie nodded, her face pale but determined in the fading light. She opened her mouth as if to say something more, then closed it again, emotion making words impossible. Instead, she straightened her spine, gathering dignity around her like a cloak. "I don't know how to thank you," she finally managed. "No need for thanks. Just—" Levi hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Whatever you're running from, make sure what you're running to is worth it." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps at being so easily read, or maybe just recognition of the truth in his words. She nodded once, firmly, then gathered the reins the way he'd shown her. Dusty moved off at an easy walk, his hooves sure on the familiar trail. Levi watched until horse and rider merged with the gathering darkness, until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the evening chorus of crickets and distant coyotes. Only then did he allow himself to feel the full weight of what he'd done. His boots were sturdy, but not made for the miles ahead. The night would bring cold, and his jacket was in the saddlebag with Dusty. Tomorrow's work would have to be cancelled or postponed, and in his line of work, a day's lost wages meant bills unpaid. But looking at the purple-painted horizon where Dusty had disappeared, Levi couldn't find it in himself to regret his choice. He thought about the note in his pocket, her elegant handwriting promising dawn's return. In his experience, promises were like morning dew, beautiful while they lasted, but quick to evaporate in the heat of day. Yet something about her desperate dignity, the protective way she held herself, made him want to believe. Setting his face toward home, Levi began to walk. The first step was always the easiest, before tired muscles and friction-heated skin had their say. He tried not to think about the distance ahead, focusing instead on putting one foot in front of the other. His grandfather used to say that a man's character was revealed in the spaces between what he had to do and what he chose to do. Walking under the emerging stars, Levi wondered what the old man would make of this choice. The moon rose, casting enough light to pick out the basic shape of the trail. Every so often, Levi's hand would stray to his shirt pocket, touching the folded note like a talisman. In the distance, a coyote called out, a lonely sound that seemed to echo something in his own heart. He quickened his pace, as if he could outwork the strange emptiness that came from watching his only true friend disappear into the night carrying a stranger's hopes. 3 hours into his walk, Levi's boots had stopped being comfortable and started being honest. Each step brought a fresh reminder of every mile, every pebble, every subtle shift of leather against sock. His grandfather used to say that a man's boots could tell you his life story. These ones were speaking volumes about choices and consequences. The night had settled into that peculiar stillness that comes in the hours before midnight, when even the wind seems to hold its breath. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, bright enough out here to cast shadows if you knew how to look for them. The Big Dipper hung low on the horizon, its handle pointing east toward Millbrook, toward Dusty and the mysterious woman who'd appeared like a character from one of his mother's dog-eared novels. His feet found a rhythm in the darkness, the steady crunch of boot on gravel becoming a kind of meditation. Left foot, right foot, each step carrying him closer to home, while his mind wandered back over the evening's events. He couldn't shake the image of Rosalie's face in that moment when she'd realized he was truly giving up his horse. Disbelief, warring with desperate gratitude, pride bowing to necessity, a lone whippoorwill called out, its melancholy song echoing off the canyon walls. Levi paused to take a drink from a spring he knew lay just off the trail, the water cold and clean against his dust-dry throat. His grandfather had shown him this spring 30 years ago, teaching him the secrets of the land that no map could tell you. Water's like truth, the old man had said. You got to know where to look for it, and sometimes you got to dig deep. The moon cast his shadow long across the ground, and Levi found himself thinking about other shadows. The ones he'd seen in Rosalie's eyes when she spoke of Millbrook, the way she kept looking over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. His boots, now properly broken in by miles of consideration, carried him past the skeleton of an old windmill, its metal bones creaking slightly in the night air. His shirt was soaked through with sweat despite the cooling air, and the note in his pocket had gone soft with moisture. He could feel it there, a constant reminder of the promise it contained. Dawn, she'd said. Such a simple word for such a complicated promise. He'd seen enough dawns to know that each one brought its own truth, its own revelations. A coyote trotted across the trail ahead, pausing to study him with reflective eyes before melting back into the darkness. Levi envied its sure-footed grace, the easy way it navigated the night. His own steps were becoming less certain as fatigue settled into his muscles, each rise in the trail a fresh challenge to tired legs. Somewhere around mile 10, his mind started playing tricks the way it often did in the deep hours of night. He'd catch movement in his peripheral vision, turn to look, and find only shadow and mesquite. The steady rhythm of his boots began to sound like hoofbeats, and more than once he found himself reaching automatically for reins that weren't there. He thought about Dusty, wondering how the horse was handling the unfamiliar rider. In 7 years, no one else had sat that saddle. Dusty could be particular about strangers, but he had a way of rising to occasions when they mattered most. Like that night 3 winters ago, when they'd helped search for old Mac Peterson's granddaughter, lost in a surprise snowstorm. Dusty had found her huddled under a cedar tree, following some instinct deeper than training. The first hints of false dawn were starting to lighten the eastern sky when Levi's boot came down wrong on a loose stone. He stumbled, caught himself, but not before his ankle rolled with a sharp flare of pain. Cursing softly, he tested his weight on it. Not broken, probably not even sprained, but definitely making its objections known. Finding a flat rock, he eased himself down to rest. The stars were starting to fade now, the brightest ones putting up their last stand against the approaching day. He drew the note from his pocket, though it was still too dark to read the words. He didn't need to. They were etched in his memory, along with the tremble in her hand as she'd written them. As he sat there, letting his ankle recover, an owl glided silently overhead, returning from its night's hunt. His grandfather had taught him that owls were nature's watchmen, keeping their own kind of accounts in the ledger of night. Levi wondered what this one made of him, a solitary figure on an empty road, trading comfort for conscience, certainty, for promise. The pain in his ankle subsided to a dull throb, manageable if he was careful. Rising stiffly, he tested his weight again. 3 miles left, maybe 4. He could see the faint glow of town lights on the horizon now, a reminder that all journeys, even the longest ones, eventually found their end. Adjusting his stride to favor the tender ankle, Levi resumed his walk. The night was losing its grip on the world, colors slowly bleeding back into existence. Soon, the first rays of true dawn would break over the mesa, bringing with them whatever truth this new day held. Until then, all he could do was keep walking, one honest step at a time, letting his boots write their own chapter in the story of this long night. The first rays of sunlight were just breaking over the horizon when Levi heard the familiar rhythm of Dusty's hoofbeats. He'd made it home about an hour earlier, his small cabin a dark silhouette against the lightening sky. Despite his exhaustion, he'd stayed on the porch, unable to rest until his promise was fulfilled, until both horse and rider were safely returned. What he hadn't expected was the newspaper clipping that would change everything. Dusty appeared first, his coat painted gold by the sunrise, moving with the same sure-footed confidence that had carried Levi through countless days. But it was the woman astride him who caught and held Levi's attention. Something had changed during the night. The desperate fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a quiet determination that transformed her entire bearing. "Mr. Boone," she called out softly, drawing Dusty to a perfect stop. The horse's ears flicked back at the sound of her voice, then forward again, a sign of acceptance that didn't escape Levi's notice. "Your horse is everything you said he would be, and more." She dismounted with more grace than she'd shown the evening before, one hand protectively cradling her belly. In the clear morning light, Levi could see the shadows under her eyes, evidence of a sleepless night. But there was something else too, a resolve that hadn't been there before. "Glad to hear it, ma'am," he replied, moving forward to take Dusty's reins. His ankle protested the motion, but he ignored it. "Hope you found what you were looking for in Millbrook." "I did." She hesitated, then reached into her jacket pocket. "And I found something else as well, something I think you should see." The paper she handed him was yellowed with age, carefully folded and refolded so many times that the creases had become soft as cloth. It was a newspaper clipping, dated 15 years ago. The headline read, "Quinn Ranch Heiress Disappears After Family Tragedy." Levi's tired mind took a moment to make the connection, but when it did, his eyes snapped back to her face. The Quinn Ranch was legendary in these parts. 30,000 acres of the best grazing land in the county, built up over 3 generations. He'd done work there himself, years ago, before the place had fallen into a kind of elegant decline under corporate management. "My father's heart attack made the front page," Rosalie said quietly, watching his face. "What didn't make the papers was how the vultures descended before we'd even held the funeral. Corporate buyers, distant relatives, all of them claiming they knew what was best for the ranch, what was best for me." Her hand tightened unconsciously on her belly. "I was 19 and drowning in grief, so I ran." Levi looked down at the photograph in the article, a younger Rosalie, her face bright with innocence not yet touched by loss, standing beside a tall man with kind eyes and her same determined chin. The Quinn ranch spread out behind them, a kingdom of grass and sky. 15 years is a long time to stay away, he said carefully, not quite making it a question. Too long, her voice caught slightly. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was just hiding. It took this, she gestured to her pregnant form, to make me realize that running away isn't always the same as being free. The sun was fully up, now painting the world in shades of gold and promise. Dusty nudged Levi's shoulder gently, his usual signal for breakfast. But for once, Levi barely noticed. The ranch, he began, is still mine, Rosalie finished. Legally, at least. The trustees have kept it running after a fashion, but she looked around, taking in his modest cabin. The well-worn tack, the careful mending evident in everything from the fence posts to Dusty's saddle. But it needs someone who understands that a ranch is more than just numbers on a balance sheet. Someone who knows the value of things that can't be counted in dollars. Their eyes met, and in that moment Levi felt the world shift slightly on its axis. Here was Rosalie Quinn, heir to the largest ranch in 3 counties, looking at him like he was something more valuable than all those acres of prime grazing land. Mr. Boone, Levi, she said, his name soft on her lips. When you gave me your horse last night, your only real possession, you did it without knowing who I was or what I could offer in return. That kind of decency, it's rarer than gold these days. The morning breeze carried the scent of creosote and possibility. Dusty shifted between them, a living bridge between 2 worlds that suddenly didn't seem so far apart. I'm offering you a job, Rosalie continued, then caught herself. No, that's not quite right. I'm offering you a partnership. The Quinn Ranch needs someone who understands both the land and the people who work it, someone who can help me bring it back to what it was meant to be. The newspaper clipping trembled slightly in Levi's hand, the weight of history and opportunity pressed between its worn folds. In the distance, a meadowlark began its morning song, its clear notes carrying across the awakening land like a benediction. Levi studied the ranch deed Rosalie had spread across his weathered kitchen table, its official seals and elaborate letterhead stark against the worn wood. Steam rose from the coffee cups between them, his chipped enamel mug and the only proper ceramic cup he owned, which he'd given to her. The morning sun streamed through his small window, catching dust motes that danced like possibilities in the air. The corporate trustees, Rosalie was saying, her finger tracing the property lines on the attached map. They've been running it like an investment portfolio, maximizing short-term profits, minimizing long-term investment. There was a controlled anger in her voice, the kind that comes from watching something you love being mishandled. They've let the North pasture go to seed, sold off half the breeding stock, and the hands they've kept on are all new hires with no connection to the land. Levi nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her words. He'd seen the changes over the years, watching from a distance as the Quinn Ranch's reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing had gradually eroded. Your father, he said carefully. He used to say that a ranch was only as good as its worst fence post. Surprise flickered across Rosalie's face. You knew him? Worked there one summer, about 20 years back. He paid fair wages and expected honest work in return. Levi's memories of James Quinn were clear. A tall man with weathered hands and clear eyes who'd check every repair himself, not from distrust, but from genuine interest in the work. He taught me how to read weather from the way cattle cluster, how to spot a sick calf before it showed symptoms. Rosalie's eyes softened with memories. That sounds like Dad. He believed in teaching, not just telling. She straightened in her chair, wincing slightly as the baby shifted. That's what I want. To bring back, not just the profitability, though God knows that needs fixing too, but the spirit of the place, the way it used to be when every hand knew every acre, when we were raising more than just cattle. We were raising good cowboys too, Levi finished quietly, remembering the mentorship program James Quinn had run for young ranch hands. His own brief time there had taught him more than just ranching skills. It had shown him what good management looked like, how respect flowed both ways on a well-run operation. Rosalie leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. Exactly, but I can't do it alone. I've been gone too long, and she gestured to her pregnant belly. I'm going to have my hands full soon enough. I need someone who understands both the old ways and the new, someone who can bridge the gap between what was and what could be. Levi stood, needing to move as he processed her words. Through his window, he could see Dusty in the small corral, contentedly grazing in the morning light. The horse had taken to Rosalie quickly, showing none of his usual wariness of strangers. Dusty had always been a good judge of character. It's a big proposition, he said finally, turning back to face her. Managing a spread like Quinn Ranch. It's not just about knowing cattle and grass. It's politics too, dealing with the board, the banks, the neighbors who've gotten used to the way things are. I know, Rosalie's voice was steady. That's why I'm not just offering you a job. This would be a true partnership. You'd have a stake in the ranch itself, voting rights on the board, your name on the deed alongside mine. She pulled another document from her folder, this one crisp and new. I had my lawyer draw this up in Millbrook this morning. It's all here if you want it. Levi's hands were steady as he picked up the document, but his heart was doing strange things in his chest. The terms were more than generous. They were transformative. A 30% stake in the ranch, full management authority, profit. Sharing, the kind of opportunity most cowboys spent their lives dreaming about. Why me? He asked finally, looking up from the papers. You don't really know me. One act of kindness on a dark road. That's not much to base a partnership on. Rosalie's answer came without hesitation. Because when I was stranded and desperate, you gave me your most valuable possession without asking for anything in return. Because your reputation in this community is worth more than any credit check or resume. Because when I saw how you cared for that horse, how you maintain this place with what little you have. She gestured around at his small but meticulously kept cabin. I knew you were the kind of person who could help me rebuild not just the ranch's operations, but its heart. Outside, a morning breeze stirred the mesquite, carrying with it the scent of rain somewhere distant. Levi thought about his grandfather's words about opportunities and character, about how sometimes the biggest decisions came dressed in the simplest clothes. There'd need to be conditions, he said slowly, watching her face. The old hands who were let go, the ones who knew the ranch when your father ran it. They get first offer to come back if they want it. The mentorship program gets reinstated, and we do this right, not quick. Building back what's been lost takes time. A smile broke across Rosalie's face like sunrise. Those wouldn't be conditions, Mr. Boone. Those would be promises. The ranch. Manager's badge felt heavy in Levi's palm. Solid brass, worn smooth by generations of Quinn Ranch foremen. His reflection in its polished surface looked back at him, somehow both familiar and strange. Rosalie had found it in her father's old desk that morning, tucked away in a drawer like a memory waiting to be rediscovered. It was Dad's idea, she'd explained, her voice soft with remembrance. Said a badge wasn't about authority, it was about responsibility. Every morning when you pin it on, you're making a promise to the land and the people who work it. Now, standing on the main house's wraparound porch in the early morning light, Levi surveyed what that promise entailed. The Quinn Ranch spread out before him like a kingdom in need of restoration. 30,000 acres of potential, and challenge rolled into one. The morning crew was gathering by the barn, a mix of familiar and unfamiliar faces, all watching him with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. Dusty stood saddled nearby, looking quite at home in the ranch's main stable. They'd given him the best stall, though Levi had insisted on keeping his old tack. Some things weren't meant to be upgraded, no matter how worn they might appear. Ready? Rosalie appeared beside him, one hand resting on the porch railing. She'd spent the past week reorganizing the main house, bringing it back to life after years of corporate sterility. Already, the place was starting to feel more like the home he remembered from his brief time here 2 decades ago. "Born ready," he replied, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. The past week had been a whirlwind of introductions, paperwork, and discoveries, not all of them pleasant. The ranch's books told a story of systematic neglect masked by creative accounting. Equipment maintenance had been deferred, grazing rotations ignored, and the once proud Quinn bloodline of cattle had been diluted with cheaper stock. But there were bright spots, too. Yesterday, Marcus Wheeler had shown up at the gate, his truck, loaded with personal gear. Marcus had been head wrangler under James Quinn, let go by the corporate trustees for being too traditional in his methods. Now he was back, bringing with him 20 years of knowledge about every creek, hollow, and seasonal grazing patch on the property. "The men are waiting," Rosalie said gently, nodding toward the gathering by the barn. "Time for your first morning." Meeting as manager, Levi pinned the badge to his shirt, its weight settling against his chest like a promise. The walk to the barn took exactly 72 steps. He'd counted them yesterday, trying to calm his nerves about today. Each step took him further from the life of a solitary handyman and closer to something bigger than himself. The conversations among the hands died down as he approached, all eyes turning to him. He recognized the look. They were waiting too. See what kind of man would be giving them orders, waiting to decide whether to trust or merely tolerate. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying across the yard with quiet authority. "For those I haven't met yet, I'm Levi Boone. Some of you might remember me from when I did odd jobs around these parts. Others might know me as the fool who gave his only horse to a stranger." This earned a few chuckles, breaking the tension slightly. "But starting today, I'm your ranch manager." He paused, looking each person in the eye before continuing. "Now, I could stand here and make big promises about changes and improvements, but that's not my style. Instead, I'm going to tell you 3 things that are true. First, this ranch used to be the standard by which others were measured, and it will be again. Second, that's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen without all of us working together. And third," he gestured to Marcus Wheeler, who stood quietly at the back of the group, "we're bringing back the old hands who knew this place when it was at its best, because wisdom that's earned shouldn't be wasted." The morning sun had cleared the eastern ridge, painting the barn in shades of promise. In the pasture beyond, cattle were beginning to stir, dark shapes against the golden grass. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. "Today, we start with the basics," Levi continued. "Marcus will take half of you to begin a proper count of our breeding stock. The rest will work with me on assessing fence lines and water sources. By sundown, I want to know exactly what we're working with, good, bad, and ugly." He saw heads nodding, backs straightening. These were cowboys who knew their business, who'd been waiting for someone to let them do their jobs properly. "One more thing," he added, his hand touching the badge briefly. "Ms. Quinn and I have an open-door policy. You see something that needs fixing, whether it's a broken fence or a broken system, you bring it to us. This isn't just a ranch. We're rebuilding. It's a community." As the men broke into their assigned groups, Levi caught Marcus's eye and nodded. The old wrangler's face creased in a smile that spoke of shared understanding. They both knew that what they were really rebuilding wasn't just fences and herds, but something less tangible and more valuable, the spirit of a place that had once meant something more than just numbers on a balance sheet. From the porch, Rosalie watched the morning meeting disperse, one hand resting protectively over her growing child. In that moment, Levi understood that they were all part of something larger than themselves, a story of renewal that had begun with a chance encounter on a dark road and was now writing itself across these 30,000 acres, one day at a time. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked innocently between feed supply invoices and cattle sales reports. Levi might have missed it entirely, if not for the way Rosalie's hands trembled when she sorted through the morning mail, her face draining of color as she recognized the handwriting. "Something wrong?" he asked, pausing in the doorway of the ranch office. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching dust motes and the silver threads in the old Quinn ranch photographs that now lined the walls. "It's nothing," Rosalie said too quickly, trying to slip the envelope into her desk drawer, but her elbow caught the edge of her coffee cup, sending it spinning. Levi moved fast, catching it before it could spill, and in that moment of distraction, the letter fell to the floor between them. The envelope was expensive, the kind used for legal documents, but it was the return address that caught his eye. Clayton Davidson, attorney at law. The name meant nothing to him, but Rosalie's reaction said everything. "He found me," she whispered, one hand pressed against her belly as if to protect the child within. I hoped coming home would be enough, but he found me anyway." Levi picked up the envelope carefully, noting its weight, the precise angles of the handwriting. "Who is Clayton Davidson, Rosalie?" She sank into her chair, suddenly looking as vulnerable as she had that night on the dark road. "My late husband's attorney, and the man who's been trying to claim control of my inheritance since the day Richard died." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history. Outside, the normal sounds of ranch life continued. Horses nickering, trucks starting up, cowboys calling to each other across the yard. But in the office, time seemed to pause, waiting for the rest of the story. "Richard Quinn Davidson," Rosalie continued, her voice steadying as she spoke. "Distant cousin on my father's side. The marriage lasted exactly 11 months, long enough for him to try claiming a stake in the ranch, not long enough for him to succeed." Her hand moved to a chain around her neck, pulling out a simple gold ring. "He died in a car accident 3 months ago. I was already pregnant." Levi set the letter on her desk, unopened. "And his attorney thinks he has a claim on your child's inheritance, on everything." The morning light caught the tears in her eyes, but her voice remained firm. Clayton was more than Richard's lawyer. He was his mentor, the architect of the whole plan. They thought marrying into the Quinn family would give them control of the ranch. When that failed, when I refused to sign over my rights, she trailed off, lost in memories. "That's why you ran," Levi said softly, understanding clicking into place. "Why you were so desperate to reach Millbrook that night," Rosalie nodded. "I needed to file paperwork establishing my child's claim as a Quinn, not a Davidson, to protect the inheritance before Clayton could challenge it." Her hand brushed the envelope. "But it seems he's going to try anyway." Levi moved to the window, looking out over the ranch that was slowly coming back to life under their care. In the month since he'd taken over as manager, they'd made real progress, mending fences, rebuilding relationships with neighboring ranches, bringing back the old hands who knew the land best. But now a different kind of threat was emerging, one that couldn't be fixed with hard work and honest dealings. "Have you opened it?" he asked, turning back to face her. "I don't need to. I know what it says." Rosalie's voice had found its strength again. "He'll claim Richard told him I promised to sell the ranch, that I'm unfit to manage it, that my child would be better served by having the estate converted to a trust under his control." She stood, moving to join him at the window. "He's been trying to get his hands on Quinn Ranch for 15 years, Levi. First through my father, then through Richard, now through my baby." A horse trailer pulled into the yard, Marcus Wheeler at the wheel. They'd been bringing in new breeding stock, starting to rebuild the bloodlines that had made Quinn cattle legendary. Every day brought small victories, steps toward restoration. "What do you want to do?" Levi asked quietly. Rosalie's reflection in the window squared its shoulders. "Fight. I ran once before and it cost me 15 years of my life. I won't run again. This is my home, my legacy, my child's birthright." She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw not just determination, but trust. "But I can't do it alone." Levi thought about the manager's badge he wore, about promises made and kept, about how sometimes standing your ground meant more than just working the land. "You're not alone," he said simply. "Not anymore." The morning sun caught the brass of his badge, throwing back light like a declaration. Outside, the ranch was waking to another day of honest work and gradual healing. But inside the office, battle lines were being drawn in silence, and the real fight for Quinn Ranch was just beginning. The old photograph album lay open on the kitchen table between them, its pages yellow with age but carefully preserved. Outside, a summer storm drummed against the windows of the main house, but inside, lamplight created a warm bubble of intimacy as Rosalie turned another page. "This was Dad's pride and joy," she said, touching a faded image of a massive bull standing proud. "In a show ring. Thunder's legacy. He won every competition in 3 states. Started our best bloodline." Her finger traced the ribbon pinned to the bull's halter, then moved to the man standing beside it. James Quinn, younger, but with the same steady eyes Levi remembered. They'd spent the evening going through old records, building their defense against Clayton's legal threats. But somewhere along the way, the work had transformed into something more personal. Each photograph seemed to unlock another piece of Rosalie's history, another layer of the ranch's story. "I remember that bull," Levi said quietly. "Even at the end, when he was too old for breeding, your father kept him in the north pasture. Said he'd earned his retirement." He smiled at the memory. "Used to take his coffee out there most mornings, just to check on him." Rosalie looked up sharply. "You knew about that? Dad always said those morning visits were his secret." "Caught him at it once when I was mending fence line. He invited me to join him." Levi's voice grew soft with remembrance. "Taught me more about ranching in those 30 minutes than I'd learned in months of working elsewhere. Said a good cattleman needs quiet time to think, and a good bull makes the best thinking companion because he doesn't feel the need to fill silence with chatter." A smile touched Rosalie's lips, then faded as she turned another page. This one showed a family portrait. James Quinn, his wife Eleanor, and a teenage Rosalie all dressed in their Sunday best. "This was 3 months before Mom died," she said softly. "Brain aneurysm. Quick and unexpected," the doctor said, as if that made it easier somehow. Without thinking, Levi reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Her fingers were cold despite the warmth of the room, and they trembled slightly under his touch. But she didn't pull away. "After that it was just Dad and me," she continued. "He did his best, but he was lost without her. Started working longer hours, pushing himself too hard. The heart attack," her voice caught. "Everyone said it was sudden, but I should have seen it coming. Should have made him slow down." "You were 19, Levi reminded her gently. "No one that age should have to carry that kind of responsibility. But I ran from it instead." The bitterness in her voice was directed inward. "Left everything he'd built, everything he'd taught me, for Clayton and his vultures to pick apart." Her free hand moved to her belly, a protective gesture that had become familiar. "I won't let them do it again. This baby deserves to know the ranch the way I did before everything fell apart." Thunder rolled outside, and the lamp flickered briefly. In that moment of near darkness, Levi saw tears gleaming in Rosalie's eyes, but when the light steadied, her expression was composed again. She turned another page in the album, and suddenly Levi found himself looking at a familiar scene. "That's—" he started, leaning closer. "You," Rosalie finished. "Dad kept photos of all the seasonal hands, but this one," she pulled the photograph, free of its corner tabs. It showed a much younger Levi, sitting astride a young Dusty, both of them looking uncertain but determined. He wrote something on the back. She turned the photo over, and there in James Quinn's distinct handwriting was a single line. "This one understands the heart of it." The words hung between them, a bridge across years and circumstances. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease, the rhythm of rain softening to a gentle percussion. "Your father," Levi said carefully. "He offered me a permanent position that summer. Said he saw something in me that reminded him of himself when he was young. Why didn't you stay? The question was gentle, free of judgment. Levi's thumb brushed absently across her knuckles, and he realized he was still holding her hand. Neither of them seemed inclined to change that. My grandfather had just had his stroke, needed someone to look after him, and I was all he had left. Your father understood, said family obligations were the best kind of duties a man could have. Rosalie's fingers tightened around his. Dad would be proud, you know. Seeing you here now, helping bring the ranch back to what it was meant to be, helping me find my way. Back too. Their eyes met across the table, across the spread of photographs that mapped out the history they were now part of. In the soft lamplight, Levi could see the echoes of that teenage girl in the strong woman before him, could trace the path of years and hardship that had shaped her into someone who could face her fears and fight for her legacy. "We'll stop Clayton," he said, and it wasn't just a promise, it was a declaration. "The ranch, your father's legacy, your child's future, we'll protect it all." "We," Rosalie repeated softly, as if testing the weight of the word. Then she smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "I like the sound." Of that, the old photograph album lay forgotten between them, its pages open to a shared past that was somehow becoming a shared future. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind the clean, fresh scent of summer rain and new possibilities. The weather radio crackled with static as Marcus Wheeler's voice cut through. "Levi, we've got trouble at the north fence line. Lightning. Strike took out the main gate. Cattle are spooked, heading for the wash." Levi was already moving, shrugging into his slicker as the first fat drops of rain peppered the barn's metal roof. "How many head?" 30, maybe 40, including those new breeding heifers we brought in last week." The gravity in Marcus's voice said what he didn't. Those heifers represented a significant part of their investment in rebuilding the Quinn bloodline. "I'm on my way. Get everyone you can up there. And Marcus," Levi paused at Dusty's stall, "keep Rosalie at the house. She doesn't need to be out in this." Static was his only answer. He was reaching for Dusty's bridle when he heard it, boots on wet concrete, moving fast. "Don't even think about leaving me behind." Rosalie stood in the barn doorway, already wearing her rain gear, her pregnant belly prominent under the yellow slicker. Lightning flashed behind her, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that made the building shudder. "Rosalie, you can't. This is my ranch too." She cut him off, moving to the tack room with surprising speed. "And those are my cattle. Besides," she added, pulling out a second set of reins, "you'll need every rider you can get." The protest died on his lips as he saw her face in another flash of lightning. Determined, capable, every inch James Quinn's daughter. She was right, and they both knew it. Time was too precious to waste arguing. "Take Sugar," he said instead, naming the steadiest mare in the stable. "She's good in rough weather." The storm hit full force as they rode out, the rain coming in sideways. Sheets that stung like needles. Dusty and Sugar picked their way carefully along the ridge trail, their riders leaning forward against the wind. In the distance, lightning illuminated the broken fence line, where panicked cattle were streaming toward the wash, a usually dry creek bed that flash floods could turn deadly within minutes. They could see other riders converging through the storm, Marcus and his crew, moving like shadows in the rain. But the cattle were already halfway to the wash, driven by instinct and terror toward lower ground that could become their grave. "We need to split up," Rosalie called over the wind. "Cut them off before they reach the water." Levi wanted to argue, to keep her close where he could protect her, but she was already turning Sugar toward the eastern approach, her horse sure-footed on the slick ground. He took the western side, Dusty responding to the slightest pressure of his knees as they picked up speed. The next 20 minutes were a blur of rain and motion and desperate strategy. Riders materialized out of the storm like spirits, moving in coordinated patterns learned through years of working cattle. But the herd was scattered, panicked, and the thunder kept spooking them in unpredictable directions. Then Levi heard it, a sound that turned his blood cold. The roar of water moving fast through the wash, carrying debris from higher ground. "Flash flood, pull back," he shouted into his radio, voice nearly lost in the storm. "Flood water coming through, get to high ground." Through the curtain of rain, he saw riders turning their mounts, abandoning the cattle chase for their own safety, all except one yellow slicker, still pushing deeper into the danger zone. "Rosalie!" His voice cracked with fear as he saw her edge sugar closer to 3 stranded heifers, trying to turn them back from the wash's edge. The roar of water was getting louder. Without conscious thought, Levi dug his heels into Dusty's flanks. The horse responded instantly, understanding the urgency in his rider's command. They covered the ground between them in long strides, reaching Rosalie just as the first wall of water crashed through the wash. The sound was deafening, water and wood and storm all mixed together in nature's fury. Sugar reared, startled by the chaos. But Rosalie kept her seat like she'd never left the ranch, one hand on the reins, the other still protectively curved around her belly. "We have to go." Levi reached across the space between them, grabbing Sugar's bridle. The water was rising fast, turning the wash into a churning river of mud and debris. Both horses danced nervously, sensing the danger. The heifers, Rosalie, started to protest. "Aren't worth your life." His voice softened even as the storm raged. "Or your babies." Something in his tone reached her. She nodded once, sharp and decisive, letting him guide Sugar toward higher ground. Behind them, the floodwaters claimed the wash completely. But ahead, the ridge rose like a promise of safety. They made it to the ridge just as another lightning bolt split the sky, illuminating the scene below. Some of the cattle had followed them up, instinct finally overriding panic. Others were scattered but visible on various high points, away from the dangerous water. They'd lost some. Levi could see at least 3 bodies being swept along by the flood, but the core of their breeding stock was safe. Rain dripped from the brim of Rosalie's hat as she turned to him, her face pale but composed. "Thank you," she said simply, "for coming after me." "Always will," he replied, the words coming without thought, honest as the storm around them. Their horses stood close together on the ridge, steam rising from their wet flanks. Below, the wash continued its violent transformation, but up here, in this moment, Levi felt something shift between them. Something as powerful as the storm, but infinitely more gentle. Rosalie reached across the space between their horses, her gloved hand finding his. Even through the wet leather, he could feel the trembling of delayed fear, of adrenaline ebbing into awareness. But her grip was strong, certain. "We should get back," she said finally. "Check on the others." Levi nodded, but neither of them moved immediately. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest moments came not in grand gestures, but in simple choices, like reaching out across empty space, like turning back from danger, like choosing what was precious over what was merely valuable. The storm was beginning to ease as they rode home, the thunder moving east, the rain softening to a steady rhythm. They'd lost some cattle, would face weeks of fence repair, but they'd saved what mattered most. And in doing so, they'd found something neither of them had expected to discover in the heart of a storm. The legal document that Clayton Davidson slapped onto the ranch office desk looked harmless enough, just papers and ink, but Levi could feel the threat radiating from it like heat from a brush fire. "A temporary injunction," Clayton announced, his expensive suit out of place against the working ranch office. He was older than Levi had expected, silver-haired and patrician, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Preventing any further disposal or modification of Quinn Ranch assets pending a full review of the estate's management." Rosalie sat behind her father's old desk, one hand resting on her 8-month belly, the other lying flat against the polished wood. Her face was composed, but Levi could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers pressed against the desk, as if drawing strength from its solid presence. "My husband's death certificate isn't even cold," she said quietly. "And you're already trying to take my father's legacy." Clayton's smile tightened. "My dear, I'm trying to protect that legacy. Richard had concerns about your stability. your tendency to make rash decisions. His eyes flicked meaningfully to her pregnant form, then to Levi, like hiring an untested ranch hand as manager and gifting him a third of the estate. Mr. Boone is a partner, Rosalie corrected, her voice steel-edged, and the ranch's performance under his management speaks for itself. Ah, yes, the mysterious Mr. Boone. Clayton turned his attention to Levi, studying him like a specimen under, and Glass, the drifter who happened to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. How providential. Levi met his gaze steadily. Nothing mysterious about honest work and keeping your word, Mr. Davidson, though I understand those might be foreign concepts in your line of work. A muscle twitched in Clayton's jaw, the first crack in his polished veneer. You know nothing about my work, Cowboy, but since you mention honesty... He pulled another document from his briefcase. Let's discuss the matter of Richard's last will and testament. Rosalie's intake of breath was sharp. Richard didn't have a will. He told me himself he hadn't gotten around to it. On the contrary, Clayton's smile was back, predatory now. He executed this will 3 days before his death. In it, he expresses grave concerns about your mental state, your fitness to manage the estate, and most importantly, he paused for effect, your ability to provide a stable home for your unborn child. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Levi moved instinctively closer to Rosalie's desk, positioning himself between her and Clayton. That's impossible, Rosalie whispered. Richard was in Houston those last days. We hadn't spoken in weeks. The will is properly witnessed and notarized, Clayton continued, as if she hadn't spoken. It recommends the establishment of a trust to manage the Quinn estate, both for the ranch's protection and for the welfare of his posthumous heir. A trust, I might add, for which I am named executor. Levi's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of gathered storm clouds. Seems mighty convenient that Richard would suddenly write a will, giving you control of everything you've been trying to get your hands on for 15 years. Clayton's mask slipped further, showing something ugly beneath the professional exterior. Careful, Mr. Boone. Accusations of fraud are serious matters, especially coming from someone whose own interest in this situation is questionable at best. Get out! Rosalie's voice was low but clear. She stood slowly, supporting herself against the desk, her other hand still curved protectively over her child. Get out of my father's office. Get out of my ranch. Your ranch? Clayton's laugh was soft and cruel. My dear, that's precisely what's in question. This injunction prevents any major decisions about ranch operations until the will's validity is established, and given your condition, his eyes moved deliberately to her belly again. I expect the court will be quite interested in ensuring the estate is properly managed for the benefit of Richard's heir. The only thing in question here, Levi said, taking a step forward, is how fast you can make it to your car. Clayton gathered his papers unhurriedly, tucking them back into his briefcase. Violence, Mr. Boone. How predictable. But then, what else should we expect from a man of your background? He moved to the door, then paused. Oh, and do enjoy the audit team. They'll be arriving tomorrow to begin a complete review of all ranch operations and finances. I'm sure you have nothing to hide. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow carried more menace than a slam. Through the window, they watched him walk to his sleek black car, his polished shoes incongruous against the ranch yard's dirt. Rosalie! Levi turned to her, but she was already moving, her composure cracking like ice in spring thaw. He's lying, she said, her voice breaking. Richard never, he wouldn't. She pressed both hands to her belly as if to shield her child from the ugly truth of its father's betrayal. Levi caught her just as her knees started to buckle, guiding her gently back to her chair. She turned into him, pressing her face against his shirt, and he could feel her trembling. Listen to me, he said softly, his hand moving in slow circles on her back. That will is about as real as a $3 bill. Clayton's gotten desperate. He's showing his hand too early, too aggressive. That's good. Means we can fight this. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with eyes that held fear, but also a spark of her father's steel. How? He has the courts, the lawyers, all the paperwork he needs. But we have the truth, Levi said simply, and we have something else he'll never understand. People who know the real value of this place. Outside, a meadowlark called. Its clear notes carrying through the office window like a reminder of everything that was worth fighting for. Rosalie straightened in her chair, drawing deep breaths until her trembling stilled. "I need you to get Marcus," she said finally, her voice finding its strength again, "and call Tom Barrett, Dad's old lawyer. It's time to show Clayton that. The Quinns aren't the only ones who know how to fight for what's theirs." The old rifle hanging above James Quinn's desk had been there so long most people didn't even notice it anymore. But Tom Barrett's eyes went straight to it when he entered the office, a smile touching his weathered face. "Your father used to say that gun hadn't been fired since his grandfather's time," he said to Rosalie. "Called it his reminder that some fights are won without bullets." The morning sun slanted through the office windows, illuminating the gathered group. Rosalie behind the desk, Levi standing at her shoulder, Marcus Wheeler by the door, and 3 generations of ranch hands filling every available space. News of Clayton's threats had spread fast, and these men had arrived without being called, their presence a quiet declaration of loyalty. Tom Barrett looked nothing like Clayton Davidson's image of a lawyer. His suit was well worn, his boots dusty, and his briefcase held together with what looked like baling wire, but his eyes were sharp as he studied the alleged will. "This," he said finally, "is quite possibly the sloppiest forgery I've seen in 40 years of practice." A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Rosalie leaned forward. "You're sure? The notary seal is registered to an office in Houston that closed 2 years ago. The witnesses' signatures." He squinted at the page. "Well, let's just say I know both Jack Martinez and Susan Chen personally. They're going to be mighty surprised to learn they witnessed a will in Houston when they were both at my daughter's wedding in Austin that day." Hope flickered across Rosalie's face, but Levi noticed she didn't relax completely. Clayton's too. Smart to rely on a forgery that could be easily disproven. "You're right," Tom agreed, closing the folder. "This isn't his real play. It's just meant to keep you off balance while he builds his actual case, proving you're an unfit guardian for your child and therefore unfit to manage the estate." "He can't do that," Marcus spoke up from his position by the door. "Anyone here can testify to Ms. Quinn's capability." Tom's smile was grim. "Character witnesses are good, but Clayton will bring experts, psychiatrists who'll testify about the trauma of losing both parents young, financial analysts who'll question the ranch's recent management decisions, maybe even medical professionals concerned about the stress of running a ranch while pregnant. "So we fight fire with fire," Levi said quietly. "Bring our own experts." "Better." Tom pulled another document from his battered briefcase. "We bring facts. Marcus, how many head of cattle did the ranch have under corporate management?" 8. 112 last count before Ms. Quinn returned, and now Marcus's chest swelled slightly with pride. 943 with 30 new calves expected this month. "All prime stock." Tom nodded, making notes. "Pete," he called to one of the older hands, "water management under the corporate trustees?" 3 wells running dry, 2 miles of irrigation ditches crumbling, Pete replied promptly. "Now we've got 5 new wells dug, solar pumps installed, and water flowing to every pasture for the first time in 5 years. The questioning continued, each answer building a picture of the ranch's transformation. Equipment maintenance records, grazing rotation schedules, breeding program improvements, all documented, all showing the steady hand of good management. "This is good," Tom said finally, "but Clayton's smart. He'll try to paint these improvements as reckless spending, maybe even claim you're liquidating ranch assets for quick improvements to hide deeper problems." "Let him," Rosalie said, and something in her voice made everyone look up. She had her father's steel in her eyes now. I've spent the last month going through every record from the past 15 years. Want to know what I found? Systematic asset stripping by the corporate trustees that Clayton recommended to the board, sale of prime breeding stock at below market rates to companies he had interests in, water rights option to developers through law firms connected to his practice. She pulled a thick folder from her desk drawer. Dad always said, keep your records clear and your powder dry. Well, here's 15 years of powder, Tom. Every questionable deal, every conflict of interest, every time Clayton tried to weaken the ranch so it would have to be sold. The old lawyer's eyes lit up as he began paging through the documents. This is exactly what we need. But Rosalie, gathering all this must have taken every night for the past month. Levi finished quietly, his hand resting supportively on her shoulder. After the day's work was done, a silence fell over the room, as the implications sank in. Finally, Marcus spoke from his post by the door. So what's our next move? Tom Barrett closed the folder with a decisive snap. First, we file our own injunction, prevent Clayton from interfering with ranch operations during the audit. Then, we start deposing everyone who's had dealings with him regarding the ranch. Make him fight a war on two fronts, defending against your grandmother's estate claims while trying to press his own case. My grandmother? Rosalie's brow furrowed. In confusion, Levi Quinn's family trust, Tom explained, a slight smile playing at his lips. Your mother's estate technically owns 5% of the ranch's water rights, rights that, according to these records, Clayton's been brokering without proper authority. Securities fraud, if I'm not mistaken, and unlike your father's old rifle up there, that's a weapon we're going to use. The morning sun had climbed higher, painting the office in shades of hope and determination. Outside, the sounds of ranch. Life continued. Horses nickering, trucks moving, men calling to each other across the yard, the rhythm of honest work that Clayton had never understood and could never truly threaten. One more thing, Tom added, gathering his papers. Clayton's type, they expect people to roll over, to get scared, to run. The minute you stand your ground, really stand it with law and right on your side, they usually fold. Rosalie's hand found Levi's where it rested on her shoulder, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that seemed as natural as breathing. Running's not an option, she said firmly. Not this time. The old rifle caught the sunlight above them, its barrel, gleaming like a promise kept through generations. Some fights, just as James Quinn had known, were won without bullets, won instead with truth, with loyalty, and with the quiet strength of people who knew what they were fighting for. The 2 train tickets lay on the kitchen table between them, their destination, Denver, printed in stark black letters. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows of the main house, carrying with it the first hint of winter's approach. It was nearly midnight, but neither Levi nor Rosalie seemed inclined towards sleep. Tom thinks it's the safest option, Rosalie said softly, one hand absently rubbing her lower back. The baby was due in less than 3 weeks. Clayton's investigators have been asking questions at the hospital in town. If they managed to challenge custody right after the birth, she didn't need to finish the thought. They'd spent the afternoon listening to Tom Barrett outline Clayton's latest strategy, a plan to have Rosalie declared temporarily unfit due to postpartum complications, giving him a window to establish court-ordered custody of the child. One foot in that door would give him leverage over everything. The ranch, the estate, their future. Denver has better hospitals anyway, she continued, but her voice lacked conviction. Better lawyers. We could have the baby there establish. Custody in a jurisdiction where Clayton has less influence. Tom says Tom's not the one who has to leave his home, Levi interrupted gently. He moved behind her chair, his hands replacing hers at her lower back, working the muscles that had been troubling her all day. Running might be safer, but safety isn't everything. Rosalie leaned back into his touch, letting out a long breath. I'm scared, Levi. Not of Clayton, not really, but of failing this child before it's even born, of making the wrong choice. Through the window, they could see the lights of the bunkhouse where Marcus and the other hands were still awake, probably discussing the same situation. Word had gotten out about Clayton's latest moves, and the loyalty of the crew had been both touching and fierce. 3 of them had already volunteered to testify about Clayton's past interference with ranch operations. "Your father," Levi said, carefully, his hands still moving in slow circles. "He used to say that running from a fight just means you have farther to go when you finally turn and face it." A small smile touched Rosalie's lips. "You seem to remember an awful lot of Dad's sayings for someone who only worked here one summer." He left an impression. Levi's voice softened. "Like father, like daughter." She reached up, catching one of his hands and pulling it forward until it rested over her belly. The baby kicked against their joined fingers, strong and insistent, as if adding its opinion to the discussion. "What would you do?" she asked quietly, "if it was just your choice?" Levi was silent for a long moment, feeling the miracle of new life beneath his palm, watching the wind stir the autumn leaves outside. "I'd stay," he finally said. "Not because it's safer or smarter, but because this land, these people, they're worth fighting for. And because running from Clayton means he wins something even if he loses the legal battle. He makes us afraid, makes us doubt ourselves. But the baby will be born on Quinland, just like its mother and grandfather and great-grandfather. Before that," his voice carried absolute conviction now, "we've got Doc Jenkins, who delivered half the county's children. We've got a whole ranch full of people who'd stand between Clayton and this child. And we've got something he'll never understand, the right to be exactly where we belong." Rosalie was quiet for so long that Levi thought she might have drifted off. But then she reached out, picking up the train tickets with deliberate movements. Without a word, she tore them in half, then quarters, then let the pieces fall like confetti onto the table. "I've run before," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. 15 years of running, of letting fear make my choices. Not anymore." She turned in her chair, looking up at him with eyes that seemed to hold both starlight and steel. "Not when I finally have something, someone worth standing my ground for." The baby kicked again, a strong movement that made them both smile. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, a sound that James Quinn had always said was nature's way of keeping watch over its own. The wind had died down, leaving behind a silence that felt like a held breath, like a moment balanced between what was and what could be. Levi's hands moved to Rosalie's shoulders, steady and sure. "Then we'll face whatever comes together. Here, on Quinland. Together," she repeated softly, as if tasting the word, finding it good. Then she smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise over the ranch, slow and beautiful and full of promise. "Help me up? If we're staying, there's work to be done. At midnight? No better time to start drafting our countersuit." She gathered the torn tickets, dropping them into the trash with a gesture of finality. "Dad also used to say that the best defense is a good offense. I think it's time we showed Clayton exactly what he's up against." As they moved toward James Quinn's old office, Levi caught their reflection in the darkened window. The rancher and the ranch heiress, the unlikely pair who had found each other on a dark road and chosen to walk into the light together. Outside, the quarter moon hung like a silver sickle over the Quinn ranch, casting enough light to see by, enough light to find their way forward. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when Clayton Davidson emerged, his polished facade finally cracking. The court papers in Tom Barrett's hand had done what 15 years of fighting couldn't, exposed the truth in language even Clayton couldn't twist. "No comment," Clayton snapped at the journalists, but his face told the story his words wouldn't. Complete defeat. Behind him, his team of lawyers hurried down the steps like rats, leaving a sinking ship, their expensive suits unable to hide their desperation, to distance themselves from their client's disgrace. Tom Barrett stood at the top of the steps, his weathered face creased in a satisfied smile as he read from the judgment. The court finds no merit in the plaintiff's claims and further notes evidence of serious ethical violations in his previous dealings with the Quinn estate. All claims against Rosalie Quinn and the Quinn Ranch are dismissed with prejudice. Levi, standing beside him, barely heard the rest. His attention was focused on Rosalie, who sat on a nearby bench nursing their week-old daughter, Emma Grace Quinn. The baby had arrived 2 weeks early, as if determined to be born before the court. Battle reached its peak. Now she slept peacefully against her mother's breast, unaware that her future had just been secured by a judge's signature. The judgment was comprehensive. Not only were Clayton's claims dismissed, but the evidence Rosalie had gathered of his past manipulations had triggered investigations by both the State Bar and the Securities Commission. His carefully constructed empire of legal manipulation was crumbling, and the Quinn Ranch stood stronger than ever. "It's really over," Rosalie said softly as Levi sat beside her. Her voice held wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe it. 15 years of looking over my shoulder, and it's finally over." "Your father would be proud," Levi replied, gently touching Emma's downy head. "Of both his girls." Rosalie smiled, and in it he saw the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. 3 generations of Quinns, she mused, looking down at their daughter, all free and clear of Clayton's shadows. The baby stirred, making the tiny snuffling sounds that never failed to melt Levi's heart. He remembered the night she was born, how the entire ranch had seemed to hold its breath. Doc Jenkins had been there, steady as always, and Marcus had organized a relay of riders to keep watch for any sign of Clayton's interference. But Emma had chosen her own timing, arriving just as dawn broke over the east pasture, her first cry mixing with the morning song of meadowlarks. Now, a week later, she was already showing signs of her heritage. Strong lungs, her mother's determined chin, and what Doc Jenkins swore was the Quinn family's characteristic way of sizing up the world with serious eyes. "Mr. Boone?" Tom Barrett approached, holding out a thick envelope. The final papers, all signed and certified, including the updated ranch deed with Emma's trust provisions. Levi took the envelope, feeling the weight of history and future combined in its pages. They had spent weeks structuring everything to protect both Emma's inheritance and the ranch's operations. The Quinn legacy was secure, not just in law, but in blood and bone, and the love of the land that ran deeper than any legal document could express. "Clayton's leaving town," Marcus called from his position near the courthouse doors. "Word is he's heading east, maybe all the way to New York. Seems Texas got a bit too hot for his kind of lawyering." A small cheer went up from the gathered ranch. Hands, who had come to witness the final hearing. They had all played their parts in this victory, testifying about Clayton's interference, documenting the ranch's improvements, standing as living proof of the Quinn Ranch's resurrection under Rosalie and Levi's management. "Speaking of the ranch," Rosalie said, rising carefully with Emma cradled against her shoulder, "I believe we have a cattle auction to prepare for. The newest Quinn bloodline makes its debut next week." Levi smiled, remembering the pride in Marcus's voice when he'd reported on the latest crop of calves, all showing the distinctive qualities that had once made Quinn cattle the standard of excellence in 3 states. They were building something special, not just preserving the past, but creating a future that James Quinn would have recognized and blessed. The autumn sun slanted across the courthouse steps as they made their way to their truck, Emma sleeping peacefully in her carrier. Around them, reporters were already crafting headlines about Clayton's downfall, but Levi knew the real story wasn't about defeat. It was about victory, about family, about the strength that comes from choosing to stand your ground. "Ready to go home?" he asked, helping Rosalie into the passenger seat. She looked at him over their sleeping daughter's head, and in her eyes he saw everything they had fought for, everything they had won. "Home," she repeated softly. "You know, that word never meant as much as it does right now." As they drove back toward the ranch, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of victory. gold and purple and promise. Emma stirred briefly, then settled back to sleep, one tiny hand curved around her mother's finger. In that moment, watching his family in the fading light, Levi understood what James Quinn had meant about some fights being won without bullets. Won instead with truth, with love, and with the courage to believe in both. The wedding ring caught the morning light as Levi slipped it onto Rosalie's finger, its simple gold band representing something far more valuable than metal. They stood beneath the old oak tree where James Quinn had once taught his daughter to ride, where Levi had first learned the true meaning of ranch management one summer long ago. Now, surrounded by the Quinn ranch family, hands and neighbors and friends, they made their promises to each other. Doc Jenkins, who had delivered Emma 3 months ago, had gotten himself ordained just for this occasion. His weathered face beamed as he pronounced them husband and wife, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "What God and good horses have brought together, let no man put asunder." Emma slept peacefully in Marcus's arms throughout the ceremony, dressed in a christening gown that had been worn by 5 generations of Quinn babies. She stirred only when the assembled crowd cheered the kiss that sealed their vows, her eyes opening to take in the celebration, with that same serious contemplation they'd come to know so well. The reception was pure ranch style, tables laden with home-cooked food, fiddles and guitars, providing music that drifted across the autumn-touched pastures, children playing tag between the legs of laughing adults. The corporate lawyers who had once haunted the ranch office would never have recognized this scene of joyful community. "Mrs. Boone," Levi said softly, leading Rosalie in their first dance. She smiled up at him, her eyes bright with happiness. "Actually, I thought we might both be Quinns. If you're willing. The ranch papers are already drawn up." Levi's step faltered for just a moment as the meaning sank in. "Levi Quinn," he tested the name, feeling its rightness. "Your father would have liked that. Dad would have loved you," she said with certainty. "He always said the measure of a rancher isn't in how many cattle he owns, but in how he cares for what's his. You proved that the night you gave up everything to help a stranger." The music swelled around them, carrying memories of that fateful night when a broken-down car and a borrowed horse had changed both their lives. Now looking around at their gathered community, at their daughter sleeping in her basket near the dance floor, at the ranch spreading out around them like a green gem in the Texas sun, Levi felt the full circle of their journey. Marcus approached, as the dance ended, carrying a set of papers along with Emma. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, not looking sorry at all, "but the buyer from the King Ranch just called. They want to double their offer for breeding rights to the new bloodline." Rosalie took Emma, who immediately snuggled into her mother's embrace. "The Quinn Dusty line is proving popular," she said with a proud smile. They had named their new breeding program after the horse who had brought them together, and the resulting cattle were already showing remarkable qualities: hardiness, good temperament, and excellent meat marbling. "Tell them we'll consider it," Levi said, knowing they would do more than consider. The ranch was thriving, but smart business was smart business. James Quinn had always said that good breeding showed up in both cattle and people, and this new bloodline was proving him right on both counts. The afternoon wore on, the celebrations shifting and evolving like a living thing. Old-timers told stories of James Quinn's day, young hands danced with local girls, and children played games that hadn't changed in generations. Through it all, Levi and Rosalie moved as one unit, sharing smiles and touches, taking turns with Emma, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their community. As evening approached, they found a quiet moment together on the main house's porch. Emma had finally given in to all the excitement and was sleeping soundly in her nursery upstairs, monitored by the ranch wives who had insisted on giving the newlyweds a brief respite. "Happy?" Levi asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders as they watched the sunset paint the ranch in shades of gold and promise. "More than happy," Rosalie replied, leaning into him. "Complete. Like everything that happened, All the pain, the running, the fear, it was just leading us here, to this. Below them, the ranch hands were lighting lanterns for the evening's continuation of the celebration. The lights twinkled like earthbound stars, casting warm glows that pushed back the gathering dusk. From the barn came the soft sounds of horses, settling in for the night, including Dusty, now enjoying a semi-retirement that involved light duties and lots of attention from his growing fan club. "You know," Levi said thoughtfully, "your father once told me that a ranch isn't just land and cattle. It's a living thing, growing and changing with each generation, but it needs the right people to help it grow right." Rosalie smiled, touching her wedding ring. "Are you saying we're the right people?" "I'm saying we're the right family," he corrected, gently. "You, me, Emma, every person out there who believes in what we're building here. We're all part of what makes Quinn Ranch more than just a business. We're what makes it a home." The evening star appeared above the eastern ridge, bright and steady like a celestial blessing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build on the foundation they had fought so hard to protect. But tonight was for celebrating not just their marriage, but the larger union of people and purpose that made the Quinn Ranch special. "Dance with me?" Rosalie asked as the music from below drifted up to them, an old waltz that spoke of enduring love and timeless promises. Under the emerging stars, they danced on the porch where James Quinn had once watched over his legacy, their steps sure, and together, their hearts beating in time with the rhythm of the land they both loved. They were no longer the desperate widow and the solitary cowboy who had met on a dark road. They were something new, something stronger, something built. On choice and trust and love, they were home. Dawn painted the east pasture in soft gold as Levi led Emma toward the stable, her small hand trustingly wrapped in his. At 4 years old, she moved with the natural confidence of a child born to the rhythm of ranch life. Behind them, Rosalie followed more slowly, one hand resting on her 8-month pregnant belly, the other holding a camera to capture what was about to happen. "Is today really the day, Daddy?" Emma's voice held equal parts excitement and solemnity. They'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. "Sure is, sweetheart." Levi opened the stable door, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and horses. "Remember what we talked about?" Emma nodded, her dark curls bouncing. "Gentle hands, quiet voice, and trust your horse like he trusts you." They stopped at a stall where a small foal stood next to its mother. The foal was just 2 months old, with a coat the color of coffee with cream, the spitting image of his sire, Dusty, who watched from the adjacent stall with what looked like grandfatherly pride. "This is Thunder," Levi said softly, using the name Emma had chosen weeks ago. "And from today on, he's your responsibility." Emma's eyes went wide as she looked from the foal to her father and back. "My very own. Just like Dusty was your daddy's," Rosalie said, moving to stand beside them. "And like Sugar was mine when I was a little girl." The foal approached the stall door, curious about his visitors. Emma reached up slowly, letting him sniff her hand just as she'd been taught. When his velvet nose touched her palm, her face lit up with a joy so pure it brought tears to Rosalie's eyes. "The Quinn tradition," she whispered to Levi, remembering. Her own first horse, her own first steps into the legacy of responsibility and love that defined ranch life. The camera clicked, capturing the moment Emma's small hand stroked Thunder's forehead, the beginning of a partnership that would shape both child and horse. Outside, the ranch was coming to life. The mentorship program they'd reinstated was in full swing, with 3 young apprentices learning the trade under Marcus's watchful eye. The Quinn Dusty bloodline had become the talk of the cattle industry, with buyers coming from as far as Montana to bid on their stock. But more importantly, the ranch had regained its soul, that indefinable quality that made it more than just a successful business. "Show her, love," Rosalie nudged Levi. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass nameplate, identical to the ones that hung on every stall, but sized for smaller hands. Emma traced the letters with a finger that trembled slightly with responsibility. Thunder Quinn and Emma Quinn, partners. Being partners means taking care of each other, Levi explained, kneeling despite the protest of muscles that had spent yesterday mending fences. Every morning you'll help with his feed and water. Every evening you'll check on him before bed. It's a big job. Think you're ready. Emma's chin lifted in a gesture so like her mother's that Levi's heart squeezed. I'm a Quinn, she said simply, as if that explained everything, and perhaps it did. The baby in Rosalie's belly kicked, as if adding its own approval to the moment. They'd decided not to learn the gender, wanting to be surprised just as they had been with Emma. But boy or girl, the child would be born into a legacy of love and purpose, just as its sister had been. Thunder nickered softly, already responding to Emma's gentle touches. From his stall, Dusty watched with bright eyes, his years settling lightly on him thanks to the easy retirement he'd earned. He still carried Levi on occasional rides, but mostly he enjoyed his role as elder statesman of the stable, teaching young horses the wisdom that couldn't be trained into them. "Remember the night we met?" Rosalie asked softly as they watched. Emma began her first grooming lesson under Marcus's careful guidance. "When you gave up your only horse to help a stranger?" Levi pulled her close, feeling their unborn child move between them. "Best decision I ever made. Better than agreeing to marry me." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "That wasn't a decision. That was destiny." He kissed her softly, then smiled as Emma's delighted laugh echoed through the stable. Thunder had discovered her pockets, held treats, and was demonstrating his approval with gentle nudges. The morning sun streamed through the stable windows, catching dust motes that danced like memories in the air. Outside, the sound of horses and cattle, trucks and tractors, voices and laughter created the everyday music of ranch life. But here, in this moment, watching their daughter take her first steps into the legacy they'd fought so hard to preserve, time seemed to hold its breath. "She's a natural," Marcus observed, approaching with his characteristic quiet step. "Got her mother's touch with horses and her father's patience. Got her grandfather's spirit too," Rosalie added, touching the nameplate on Thunder's stall. "Dad always said the best way to judge a person's character was to watch how they handled their first horse." Emma was singing softly to Thunder now, some made-up song about horses and sky and forever friendship. The foal's ears were pricked forward, absorbing every word as if it were the most important thing in the world, which, Levi reflected, watching. His daughter's face glow with joy and purpose. Perhaps it was. This was what they'd really won in their battle with Clayton. Not just the ranch's physical assets, but the right to pass on these moments, these traditions, these quiet teachings about responsibility and love. The right to show their children that the greatest wealth wasn't counted in dollars, but in the bonds between people, animals, and the land that supported them all. The future of Quinn Ranch was secure, not just in legal documents and bloodlines, but in the heart of a little girl learning to be gentle with a young horse, in the kick of an unborn child beneath its mother's heart, in the daily rhythm of work and purpose that had sustained this land through generations. It was, Levi thought, as he held his wife and watched their daughter begin her own journey, exactly what James Quinn would have wanted to see. The family portrait hung in the ranch office where James Quinn's rifle had once kept watch, capturing a moment of perfect contentment. Emma, now 5, sat proudly astride Thunder, her little brother James tucked securely in front of her. Levi and Rosalie stood on either side of the horse, their hands joined behind the saddle, forming a circle of protection and love around their children. Dusty dozed in the background, his presence a reminder of where their story had begun. "Your grandfather would have loved this," Marcus said, studying the photograph as he handed Levi the morning reports. 10 years into retirement, the old foreman still started each day with a cup of coffee in the ranch office, sharing wisdom and friendship with the family he'd helped protect. "Which grandfather?" Emma asked from her perch on Levi's desk, where she was seriously reviewing her own reports, drawings of horses and cattle that she insisted needed daily updating. "Both of them, sweet pea," Rosalie answered, bouncing 1-year-old James on her hip. The boy had his father's quiet way of studying the world and his mother's determined chin. Both of them would have been so proud of this place and the family we've built here. Through the window, they could see the morning crew heading out to the north pasture, where the latest generation of Quinn dusty cattle grazed. The breeding program had exceeded even their highest hopes, producing stock that combined hardiness, intelligence, and quality in ways that had revolutionized Texas ranching. But more importantly, the Quinn Ranch had become a model of how to run a working ranch while preserving the values and traditions that gave the work meaning. The mentorship program now had a waiting list 3 years long, with young apprentices, eager to learn not just ranching skills, but the deeper lessons about responsibility, community, and stewardship of the land. Every summer, Emma would solemnly help lead the new arrivals on their first tour, explaining ranch rules with all the gravity of her 5 years. "Daddy," she said now, looking up from her drawings, "can we check Thunder's new shoes before school? I promised him we would." Levi smiled, remembering another little girl who had once taken her responsibilities to horses just as seriously. "Sure, can, Princess. Why don't you go get his brush ready?" As Emma skipped out, her dark curls bouncing, Marcus shook his head with a gentle laugh. That child was born knowing how to talk to horses. Must be the Quinn blood. Quinn spirit, Rosalie corrected, setting James down to toddle after his sister. The same spirit that helped a certain cowboy give up his only horse to help a stranger in need. Levi pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Best investment I ever made." Through the open window came the sound of Emma's voice, singing to Thunder as she had every morning since he became hers. The horse's soft nickering in response was like a harmony to her song, a duet of trust and affection that echoed across the generations. Young James, reaching the stable door, let out a happy squeal at the sight of the horses. At barely a year old, he was already showing signs of being as horse-crazy as his sister. In the paddock beyond, Dusty lifted his head at the sound, nickering a greeting to the youngest Quinn. The morning sun painted the scene in shades of gold and promise. The children in the stable doorway, the horses in their stalls, the cattle dotting the distant pastures, and the ranch hands going about their daily work. This was what they had fought for, what they had built together, not just a successful ranch, but a living legacy of love, purpose, and belonging. "You know," Marcus said softly, rising to leave them to their morning routine, James Quinn used to say that a ranch isn't just about raising cattle, it's about raising hope. "Looks to me like you two have managed to raise both." As the old foreman's boots echoed down the porch steps, Levi and Rosalie stood in the office doorway, watching their children with Thunder. Emma was showing James how to offer a treat with a flat palm, her small face serious with responsibility. The boy's delighted laugh when the horse's velvet lips tickled his hand, carried across the morning air like music. "We did good," Rosalie whispered, leaning into her husband's embrace. "No," Levi corrected gently, thinking of dark roads and desperate choices, of trust given and promises kept, of love that had grown from a single act of kindness into something strong enough to sustain generations. "We did right." Above them, the Texas sky stretched endless and blue, while around them the Quinn Ranch continued its daily rhythm of life and work and purpose. The story that had begun with a stranded widow and a generous cowboy had grown into something larger than either of them had imagined, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, trust over doubt, and the courage to believe in something bigger than yourself. In the stable, Emma's song continued, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow, and all the tomorrows yet to come.